Hey everybody, welcome back. My name's Dustin Harris. I'm with Appraisal Precision. I'm just headed back from an appointment in Idaho Falls where I appraised a home for a purchase, and the homeowner, who is not the client obviously, but the homeowner had a question about the appraisal that I thought was a great question that I could share with you some insight, some information. Now again, I am driving, so please ignore the road noise, but hopefully you can hear me okay. The question had to do with, what if the appraisal does not come in at the purchase price? Now, the humorous answer I gave him is the chances of it coming in at the purchase price are slim to none. And he kind of looked at me like, uh-oh. I said, pretty good chance it'll come above the purchase price. When he asked me if it's not going to come in at purchase price, I think he meant that or above, right? But I wanted to put him at ease, and I'll put you at ease as well, by saying that it is pretty rare. In fact, I can actually give you numbers because we've quantified it, at least in our office. About 6 to 8% of the time, the appraisal comes in below the purchase price. It's not very often. In other words, 90% of the time it's going to come in above the purchase price, or at least at the purchase price or above. So it's not something to be worried about, but it does happen. Why does it happen? Well, that's a topic for another video at another time, but typically it comes down to the buyer not being fully educated or being a little bit too gung-ho in the transaction. Okay, so what happens if you have an appraisal that comes in below purchase price? Well, first of all, I would ask that you look at it differently than is typically portrayed. So typically they say, what happens if an appraisal comes in low? Well, that's one way to look at it, or probably the more accurate way to look at it would be, what happens when the purchase price is too high for the market to bear? Because an appraisal should reflect what the market actually says the home is worth. Our job is not to rubber stamp a purchase transaction where you have a willing buyer and a willing seller. Otherwise, why would they get an appraisal? They would just go off of purchase price. Willing buyer, willing seller, we'll just loan on that amount. Remember, our client is typically the bank, is typically the lending institution, and they've hired us as an unbiased third party to tell them what the home or property is worth so that they can make a lending decision and make sure that the collateral is there. So keep that in mind. Our role is not to be an advocate for the seller or an advocate for the buyer or an advocate for either real estate agents. Our goal is to be an unbiased third party. So when that appraisal comes in lower than the purchase price, what are your options? Well, there's several. First of all, there is what's called a rebuttal process, and it's called the reconsideration of value. So if you think that the appraiser has not done an accurate job, there is a process that the buyer, the borrower, can go through, reaching out to their loan officer, their lending institution, and saying, I think there's a problem with this appraisal. I want a reconsideration of value. Now, that's a very long and tedious process, but it is an option. Number two, you might look at it as a sign, if you're the buyer, that maybe I shouldn't be going through with this deal. Sometimes, even though we're not an advocate for a buyer, sometimes the information that we provide can be used as information that will allow them to make a better decision. Holy cow, I almost made a huge mistake and paid $30,000 more from this house than it's actually worth according to the real estate expert, the valuation expert, the appraiser. So that's step number two. Maybe it's time to walk away and look for something else. Number three, you could possibly go through a different lender, which may mean that you possibly could get a different appraisal. Now, that might be a time-consuming and expensive process, especially in a hot market where things are selling very quickly. But again, it is an option that you might consider. Finally, you might consider renegotiation, and this happens actually a lot. So let's say that you go into a situation and you offer $203,000 on a property, 203, and the appraiser comes in at 198. Is it possible to go back to the negotiation table and say, okay, Mr. Seller, the appraisal came back and it came in $5,000 lower than we're offering. We've looked over the appraisal. We think that it's pretty good. We think that it's credible. We think that it's supportable. We believe the appraiser. Your home is worth $198, not $203. Now it's possible that the seller will say, well, no, I'm staying where I'm at. But it's also possible that they would say, yeah, you actually in your contract have $5,000 in closing costs. Let's take those out, and instead of me paying your closing costs, you pay your own closing costs, but the purchase price is now $198. Or maybe you bring down the purchase price altogether. There are many, many options when it comes to renegotiation or steps you might take when the purchase price is higher than the appraised value. If I can answer anything else for you, please comment below. It would be my pleasure to help you out. Thank you for joining me, and we'll catch you next time.